My name is Stephanie and I am from the Dominican Republic. Since I was very young, I experienced a deep connection with the spiritual. Since I was a child, I could see angels and demons, which terrified me and made me fear the darkness. I remember that these demons spoke to me, but I also saw angels that protected me and gave me a kind of spiritual food that was sweet and comforting. Also, since I was little, I had dreams that came true, which gave me the certainty that I had a spiritual sensitivity that others did not seem to share. I grew up with these abilities, believing that it was something completely normal. I thought that everyone could see unclean spirits and angels and that everyone could predict the future in the same way that I did. For me, there was nothing extraordinary about what I saw or felt until later on, when I realized that it was not something common. God had a purpose for me. But the enemy tried to divert that purpose from an early age. I remember that my sister also had certain spiritual qualities, although thank God, she did not fall into the same paths as me. However, in that I did not understand where these visions came from, nor did I understand the meaning of what I saw. Everything seemed natural to me. I thought it was part of life. It was not until later that I realized there was a divine purpose behind all this, a purpose that the enemy tried to destroy. At the age of 16, like many teenagers of my time, I had a Facebook account, a social network that at that time was not as popular as it is now. One day while I was catting, I received a message from a person from Mexico who called himself the Red Devil. This name disconcerted me immediately, but what he said to me disturbed me even more. He wrote to me to tell me that I had been chosen to be a Satanist. The surprising thing was that he described to me with accuracy many things that I had experienced since I was a child, the nightmares, the visions of angels and demons. He explained to me that the demons had already observed me in the spiritual world and that they knew that I saw them. It was as if everything I had lived up to that moment had been monitored by a dark force, and now they were offering me a place among them. I had no idea what Satanism was. I also didn't know what Luciferianism or witchcraft was at that time. I was just a normal young girl with friends and a normal student life. However, the offer they made me awakened something in me, a curiosity, perhaps a desire to know more about that world that seemed to be behind my experiences. They gave me the option to accept or reject their offer. After thinking about it for a while, I decided that I would be a Satanist for a week. I immersed myself in researching everything I could about Satanism. I felt fear, a strange feeling, but still something pushed me to move forward. I finally decided to begin the process. My initiation was through a prayer, or one that was accompanied by the image of a demon painted on a sheet. I remember having made that prayer on my knees, and at that moment my life changed. Immediately, after completing the prayer, I began to see unclean spirits from the world of darkness. It was a terrifying experience, but deep down I knew that something in me had already crossed a line. I had a vision of a doll tied to a stick, one of the most common forms of witchcraft worldwide. The people who had contacted me told me that I was not alone. They assigned me someone in my country, a person from my own high school, to guide me on this new path. This is how demons operate. They told me they found someone in my environment who was already involved and prepared to initiate me. We immediately began to form a sect that we called the Vile. Our goal was to recruit young people, mainly those who were vulnerable, marginalized and rejected by society, young people who had family problems, who were on the streets, young people with a spirit, or simply those who were looking for a place where they felt accepted. We knew that these young people wounded by life were easier to manipulate. We recruited these young people and convinced them to make a pact for their soul. Once they did, their soul was imprisoned in the spiritual world. After that, many fell into prostitution, drugs, and eventually death. Their life was destroyed because their soul no longer belonged to them. We were in charge of bringing them to that point by talking to them about spiritual levels and powers that they would supposedly receive if they continued with us. While all this was happening, I continued studying, but my life was no longer the same. My world had taken a complete turn. I began to talk to unclean spirits and my heart became harder and harder. What was once just a curiosity had now become an obsession. I began to realize that the physical world had no value compared to the spiritual world. There was the true power, and that filled me with an excessive ambition. I wanted more. I wanted to reach higher spiritual levels and get more power. I began to dream of becoming a high priestess and reaching the highest level of authority in that dark world. My ambition grew so much that I said out loud that I wanted to fly, that I wanted to completely dominate the spiritual world. The demons that guided me began to train me to become a high priestess of Satan. Over time I reached a point where I was required to make a deeper pact. At that time the pact became complicated for a reason. I was still a virgin and the demons wanted me to give up my virginity in exchange for obtaining more spiritual levels. However, I was in a dating relationship. I was 17 years old and I decided that I was not going to give myself to the unclean spirits but that I would stay with my boyfriend. This decision angered the demons. As retaliation they began to take away the gifts that they had given me, such as the gift of invisibility and other spiritual qualities that they had given me. They were upset with me, and although I felt that constant spiritual pressure, I decided to distance myself from the sect. Not only because of the pressure of the demons but also because I needed to concentrate on my studies. I had to pass a subject and my teacher was a Christian, which made it impossible for the demons to help me. I hardly attended high school since most of my time was spent meeting with other young people from the sect, opening circles and talking to demons. I clearly remember the first time I spoke directly with Satan, or rather with Lucifer. It was a moment that changed my perspective of everything. At that time, I was facing a problem of an unwanted pregnancy and I went to the sect looking for answers. That was where I realized the difference between Satanism and Luciferianism are two sects that I was involved in. I was part of a sect of Luciferism called the Nosferatu, a group that served Lucifer directly. This group was well known and the figure of the Nosferatu had become very popular, even in clothing and decorative objects that people commonly used without knowing their real meaning. When I joined the Nerat, I began to get to know Lucifer up close. He was a different facet of Satan and our relationship was based on mutual promises. To enter this new sect, I had to make a pact again, this time with my soul. However, the pact was rejected several times in the spiritual world. Because there was a greater divine purpose in my life, every time I tried to make the pact, something blocked it and I had to try again. Part of the process involved cutting myself and write with my own blood that I gave my life and everything I was to Lucifer only. Then could he take total control of me in the spiritual world. I tried more than 8 times to give my soul and finally the pact was accepted. I clearly remember the moment the agreement was sealed. I saw an unclean spirit that presented itself as an angel. He had long white hair, and his features were perfect, almost androgynous. He did not look like a man or a woman. His clothing was completely white and he always wore a bug on his shoulder. This was one of the physical characteristics of Lucifer when he manifested himself. When he spoke to me he did so with a calm voice, serene but full of dark wisdom. He promised me many things, telling me that he would take me far, that if I remained faithful to him, I would obtain great rewards. We also talked about songs and poems that he himself wrote. Songs that promoted morbidity and violence among young people. Many of the songs we hear today are written by demons, designed to push young people into crime, drug use and destruction. These subliminal messages were present in the music and dances that society consumed without realizing their demonic origin. At that time, I got to know the spiritual world more deeply and I met entities of high hierarchy. One of the facets that I got to know was that of the Leviathan, a gigantic spirit that lives in the depths of the ocean, an immense presence that also inspired terror. I met a spirit with whom I got to marry in the spiritual world. We were married for approximately 9 years and this pact was sealed with a ring. This unclean spirit made me go through many battles. It was an entity half horse and half man with the face of a goat. It was called Baphomet. It fought fiercely when my current commitment came up, even appearing to my partner to try to prevent our bond. This demon tried by all means to frustrate my commitment, showing its strength and high hierarchy in the spiritual world. During those years in which I was married to Baphomet, this demon acted as if he were a normal man, which makes me understand that there are many people who have also been visited by demons in their dreams, feeling a physical presence. These visits, although they seem like dreams, are more real than many imagine. And it is because the demons seal pacts in the spiritual world with their victims, even marrying them as he did with me. As this pact progressed, I began to climb in the spiritual levels. I reached such a high point that I no longer needed to invoke the demons through rituals or circles. It was enough to think about them and they would appear instantly in the place where I was. I was completely immersed in this world to the point that I could speak directly with the demons, ask them for things and see how they acted even before the events happened. When I was face to face with high-ranking demons, I developed abilities that for me were evidence of my spiritual power. It was real. I could move objects with just my fingers. I could read people's thoughts, and I had such great spiritual ability that I felt like I was a high priestess in the spiritual world. It was as if my life no longer belonged to the physical plane and everything around me was dominated by the invisible forces that they control the world from the shadows. The feeling of power was unmatched, but it was also the beginning of my downfall. The pacts in that dark world demanded sacrifices as the demons asked me for things increasingly extreme. One of the most common pacts was the lust pact, where the demons demanded acts of immorality. There were also blood pacts where bloodshed was required, and violence pacts where the demons asked that a person take the life of a family member or someone close, thus hardening the person's heart and leaving them prepared for acts even more atrocious. The bloodshed pacts were the strongest. These pacts strengthened the bonds with the demons, and the more blood was shed, the more the spiritual connection was consolidated. The most disturbing thing is that many young people who ended up in gangs or bands were indirectly involved in Satanism without even knowing it. Demons operate under many names and disguises, and what appears to be a gang or a violent group is actually another arm of the occult. The modus operandi was clear. The demons demanded that someone be devoted to harden the heart of the one who committed the crime. If a person could take the life of a family member, then he could kill anyone. This created an unbreakable chain of loyalty within the sect or the group. The problem was that once one entered this circle, getting out was practically impossible. I tried several times, but I always felt that something was holding me back, as if I were trapped. Getting out of that world was only possible through the gospel. I tried to escape in many ways, but I couldn't do it. I saw many news of people who murdered family members like cousins or brothers, and although at that time society qualified them as crazy people, now I know that many of those crimes were demands of demons. What to the world seems irrational or inexplicable, on the spiritual plane has a reason for being, because these people were sent or manipulated by dark forces to fulfill pacts or demonic rituals. I remember a very particular case that shocked everyone in the country. A young man who ended up killing his wife and 3 children. People talked that he had lost his mind, but I knew what was behind all that. I knew he belonged to a sect with which I had also had contact. They called him the Shaman Chakra. Before he started working in a mechanical workshop, he was already immersed in this sect, and everything he did, each act of violence, was demanded by the demons. This young man had tried to escape from that world to form a family, to lead a normal life, but he had never cleansed himself spiritually. He never went to Christ to be freed. The demons continued to demand things from him until finally he could not take it anymore and committed those terrible crimes, sometimes from outside. It seems that someone simply went crazy. No, but in reality there is much more behind those acts. The demons do not stop until they get what they want. The demands in that world is relentless, and those who try to get out without seeking redemption in Christ are dragged even deeper into darkness. Demons know when someone tries to break free, and when that happens they demand bigger sacrifices, more atrocious. Now many wonder why demons demand such acts. What do people gain by obeying them in the spiritual world? It is all about levels, hierarchies. It is like an army where each higher rank grants more power. Satanists seek to reach the higher levels in what they call the astral world, a spiritual plane where Satanists can navigate, where they gain access to more knowledge and power. It is a constant competition for superiority, to be stronger than the other, to reach higher planes. The demons, in exchange for these sacrifices and obedience, offer things material and spiritual. There are people who have become millionaires by making a pact with their soul, because for demons money and material wealth are not difficult to grant. They also offer protection, as in the case of those who face problems on the streets. They can make a pact so that the bullets do not reach them, or so that they do not end up in jail. What happens is that the demons are assigned to an entity of higher hierarchy. What happens is that demons assign a higher-ranking entity to protect the person from the demon that is behind the danger. For example, if someone is being chased by the demon of the accident or any other, they assign a stronger demon to prevent that evil from reaching them. Oh, all of this is handled by hierarchies. The most powerful demons control those of lower rank and thus prevent problems from affecting the person. In this way, it is common to see people who are unknowingly involved with Satanism in one way or another, even those who only seek protection or wealth from witches. Witches simply act as intermediaries channeling energy and pacts with demons. The same happens with spiritual blessings. Just as God can bless someone, demons can also offer things, but there is always a price to pay. Yes, there are people who have obtained great wealth through pacts with the enemy. But what most do not understand is that these benefits are not permanent or free of consequences. Going to Satan for money or power may seem like a quick fix, but what people don't see are the curses that come along with those blessings. What the demons give they take away in a brutal way. If they offer you a car, that car can be the cause of your fatal accident. If they give you a house, that house can become the scene of tragedies. The demons collect everything with blood. There are entire families that after getting rich through dark pacts see how every year one of their members dies in a tragic way. This is because the demons demand a payment, and that payment is always in human lives in short-term suffering. It may seem that things are better, that the money flows, that the protection is real, but all that collapses eventually. People who turn to the occult are seeking their own destruction without realizing that what they are accepting is a curse that will affect their descendants, a bond that will be perpetuated in their family for generations. What the demons are really doing is trapping people in a web of curses from which it is very difficult to escape. I have seen many people receive from the demons, and at first everything seems to be fine, but with time the consequences come. And they do not understand why a son dies, a daughter becomes seriously ill, and every year a tragedy is repeated. This is because the demons take the lives of their relatives. Making a pact with them to have riches or goods always implies suffering and death. The demons also take away happiness. Even if you may have material possessions within you, there is a void that only Christ can fill. When we come to Christ, even if we do not have many material things, we experience genuine happiness and satisfaction that the world cannot offer. But while we are in the world, we try to fill that void with alcohol, vanity, riches, and none of that is enough. Only Christ can fill that void. What the demons give you, like a car or a house, eventually becomes a source of curse. Even marriages are not exempt. Many women go to witches to make a man fall in love with them or to bring back a husband who has left. However, when that man comes, instead of love, he mistreats her physically or psychologically. Everything that demons do has only one purpose: evil. Regarding the spiritual levels that I reached, I advanced through different pacts and rituals. I reached levels that allowed me to have certain gifts such as invisibility, although not indefinitely, but for limited periods. I also developed the ability to control people's minds, read their thoughts, and manipulate their actions. I had access to many spiritual levels, which made me feel powerful, but at the same time, each new level brought with it more bonds and suffering. Sometimes people doubt the spiritual, but the truth is that everyone has had some spiritual experience in their life. When we look at the world around us, we see the moon, the stars, and we realize that no man could have created something so magnificent. We look at the sea and understand that its immensity could not have been the work of human hands. I use the process of a woman giving life. It is a miracle that only God could have designed every detail of creation. It is evidence that there is a God who is behind everything. Trying to find logic or science in the spiritual often makes no sense, because only God has all the answers. Only He could have created a world so perfect and full of wonders that it transcends our understanding. So, although some try to deny the spiritual, sooner or later everyone finds the truth that God exists and that everything we see is the work of His hands. At that time, while I was practicing the occult, I noticed that I was transmitting something similar to what many people perceive. When someone is a Christian, they enter a place, a presence, an energy. But what I projected was not light, it was darkness. It was a disturbing mystery, a sensation that enveloped those around me. I was always immersed in thoughts about the spiritual world, but everything was from a negative perspective, as if that shadow that accompanied me extended to others, creating that restlessness. While I was advancing in the practices of Luciferism, I began to have a more structured discipline in the spiritual, something that in that world was a requirement. I failed in a key aspect, and that it was enough for a severe discipline to be imposed on me. I had a leader who before falling into Luciferism had been a Christian for many years. She knew the ways of God, but she had been deceived by demons who began to use the gifts she had received from God. She had been 17 years in the gospel and now served Lucifer. When I realized her situation, I tried to warn her what was happening, but the demons, perceiving my intentions, acted before I could say anything. They took me to a meeting where I was punished and a curse was decreed on me that accompanied me for 2 years. I clearly remember when the unclean spirit Lucifer appeared to me and told me that the good waters would be closed to me and that I would be trapped in that curse until I achieved forgiveness. That curse was devastating. I felt that everything around me was collapsing. Bad luck that really does not exist seemed to follow me at all times. I felt that the worst things were happening to me constantly, as if a dark cloud were always upon me. The next 2 years were a period in which everything in my life was destined for failure and pain, but still the demons were not finished with me. They had something else prepared, something that would do me even more harm. I had a call from God, but I refused to accept it. I rejected the idea of converting to Christianity, and I convinced myself that I would never give up the occult practices. I repeated that I would never give up the life I led, that I would never stop doing what I did, however saved. When the time came that I was introduced to witchcraft, everything began to change. I went through different spiritual stages. First I was in Satanism, then in Luciferianism, and finally I got into witchcraft. I was also part of sects such as werewolves and vampires, where I witnessed many horrible things, but when I came to witchcraft and Santeria was when I really began to immerse myself in practices that in this country unfortunately have become almost a culture in our culture. It is common to talk about witchcraft and sorcery as if it were something normal, something that is rooted in many communities. The demons have taken advantage of that, using images of saints to deceive and lead people down the dark paths. I began to get more involved in these practices because the demons had already prepared that deception. When they came to me, they did not tell me that they were demons. They made me believe that the saints I served were true saints. I thought that San Miguel, Santa Marta and others were saints that protected me, and so they convinced me that it was okay to do witchcraft work, do rituals with candles, herbal baths and even visit cemeteries. I remember myself believing that all of that was okay, that I was with God. At that time I had a ring that I saw in Haiti to be left for 3 days in the grave. It was a snake-shaped ring that I used to hypnotize people and hurt them. After my conversion I tried to burn that ring, but it would not let itself be destroyed. The person who helped me in my liberation process sent me videos where I saw how they tried to burn it, but the ring remained intact. That was the strength of the demonic ties that kept me tied all this time. I was deceived believing that I was on God's side when in reality I was serving the demons. They had convinced me that I was not involved in Satanism but in a form of spirituality that supposedly brought me closer to God, but in truth what surrounded me was pure darkness disguised as holiness. When I began to get more deeply involved in witchcraft, I was introduced to different rituals and practices. I began to perform ritual leaf baths that I was told would help me become a kind of healer, a missionary with spiritual powers. I let myself be carried away by all this, believing that I was on the right path. So little by little I built an altar in my room, hiding from my mother. On that altar I placed images and objects with which I performed my rituals. However, when my mother discovered what I was doing, she threw all the pictures and images on the floor. This triggered a big argument with my sister, who was already a Christian. I clearly remember how the demons, enraged by my sister's action, said that they would kill her for having destroyed those pictures. Out of fear, I picked up the pictures and reset up the altar in my room, convinced that it was the right thing to do. During this time I came to meet many unclean spirits, such as Santa Marta, Candelo, San Miguel, San Santiago, and others from the so-called 21st Division. I also met a very violent one called Papachistan, or a spirit of accidents, blood and death, as well as another known as Tim Yola Webb, a spirit of death. All these spirits operated in terrible ways, and I turned to them when I wanted to do dark work. I remember one particular night I went to the cemetery at 12 at night. There I took out a skull and put in it the name of a person so that that person would suffer total destruction. Shortly after that, that person was completely destroyed, and I saw the power that the demons exercised at that time. I did work of shipments to destroy families, and I saw how those families crumbled under